have a couple more things that I want to talk about with myself, and hopefully some of this is to end the obsession with words. I have a certain project I want to talk about with myself. I don't know if it'll work or if it's something interesting to other people labeled with bipolar, but I think it could be something that's kind of interesting and fun. And there's a few layers to it. And basically I came up with this idea after watching some videos by the YouTuber Vsauce. And he has a video called Messages to the Future, something like that. And at the end of the video, he talks about something called the Library of Babel. And I'd heard about this Library of Babel before conceptually, because I actually had a paper on it that somebody had written. But I didn't know it was a thing, like a thing on the computer. And when I first started writing stuff down for this idea to do with this online Library of Babel, which is libraryofbabel.info on the computer, the library wasn't up and running, so I couldn't test it out. But I kept going back to it and eventually found out that it was again working, and I got to give it a try. So basically, this library is built algorithmically, and you can listen to the video by Vsauce to get a sense of how it works. But basically, any 3,200 character combination of letters A to Z, comma, space, and period make up the pages in these books in these hexagons. So the library is made of hexagons, hexagon-shaped rooms with 4 walls of books, 5 shelves on each wall, 32 volumes on each shelf, and then each volume of book has 410 pages. So that's the format in this online library. And so basically every page combination that could ever exist exists in the library, and it already exists. It's already predetermined, and it only needs to be looked up. So he says you can find the description of your birth, every possible description of your death, every poem, every joke, everything that could be said can be found on this site. So some of that is quoting Vsauce and what he was saying. And he also said that we can feel the difference between a program just sort of making it up and a person saying something and meaning it and intending it and saying it with intentionality. So that's the library format. And so a lot of the pages are just like XZ, Q, space, CT, and there's not much sense in it. But some people try to find maybe meaning and insights and things that have never been thought of in this library, because everything's in there, every possible word combination. So that would imply that scientific hypotheses that we haven't hypothesized yet are in there. But once we have it in mind, we can look it up and it's already in there. So to me, this might have some kind of interesting thing to do with bipolar disorder. And not really directly, but the fact that bipolar people say a lot of random things. They say things in new combinations. They might say things that have never been said before. And a lot of times maybe because we're talking too fast, or we're acting strange, or we're saying it to somebody that knows us and then they're more focused on how we're acting out of character. We don't necessarily capture what we say and look for any type of validity in what we say. So it's not even just what we say, but it's the context in which we say it. And generally what happens is we're, talking and maybe talking too much and to friends or strangers, and that's the context. And eventually we end up talking to psychiatrists and saying what our symptoms are. And that's very narrow. And those questions are asked to everybody. And we miss the richness of what was said, because Vsauce says just because it can be made, like already made in this library of Babel, doesn't mean that it has been said. So I feel that it's possible that the Babel of bipolar could be a source of looking up things in this library. So if we look it up in the library and it's there, it gives us a little bit of a sense of validation that, hey, it's in this library, and everything's in the library, so maybe it's not that validating. But interestingly enough, Vsauce says at the end of the video that we're born at just the right time to explore language, to explore what can be said, what should be said, what that can be said will you be the first to say. So that's really interesting. What that can be said will you be the first to say? And I think it's possible that we as bipolar people have said things that we said first. And the other element to that is that I might say something that I said first, and maybe 2,000 other people who are labeled bipolar also said that. So it's not necessarily first, but they also said that same thing, that if they just have an audience in that, whoever's listening is a friend or a family member, it's not really going to go anywhere. But if we have a way to collate that together, then it could be interesting to see that, hey, X number of bipolar people around the world have said this, or it's come to mind. So there could be a way to capture it that is based on the library, and also because the easiest way to get stuff out of that library is if a human being types it in, and it's there, and it will be there. But what a bipolar person types in could be very unique in comparison. And since it's 3,200 characters a page, a bipolar person could type in 3,200 characters, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be making sense. It could be random words, made up words, definitions, hypotheses, poetry, new words, whatever, just everything. So what this library of Babel has sort of inspired me to think about is that we as bipolar people could write up our work in a Babel format, meaning just actually follow the same format as the Library of Babel and do 3,200 characters a page, A to Z, comma, period, space, and type it up in a volume, which is 410 pages. And now if each of us did that, we would have a pretty big library of bipolar Babel. And it almost might be a way to bring some of the sense of the Library of Babel. If bipolar people type up their Babel, it might actually harness and harvest some of those insights and meaningful things that people are looking for, because we do get in touch with a lot of insight, meaning, perception, hypotheses, new language structures, but it's sort of difficult to, since there's so many aspects to what we channel, to what we are given access to, and there's so much of it, like a huge amount. It's really challenging to take all of that information and put it into some logical book format. So I suggest just typing it up in the Babel format and not even worrying about it flowing or anything like that. And another reason for that is because it could be possible that the audience for the Library of Babel, the Bipolar Brainstorm Babel, I think I would call it something like that, is that the audience would likely be artificial intelligence. And the reason I say that is that artificial intelligence could take all the volumes and probably put together some coherent books and categorize things in different ways to help us. Because I think with the sheer volume of it, and also, well, basically, if we took our sheer volume of information and took it to a psychiatrist, we would just get a diagnosis. But if we take that volume and we put it into AI, it would be able to analyze it and make sense of it in some way. And there's so much of it, and it could be numerous people's volumes put together, that it would be able to make some sense of it in a way that maybe was never before possible. I've started typing up volume 1 of the Library of Bipolar Brainstorming Babel, and I have a whole note box full of notebooks, and I think it's going to be a bit of a slow process because it gets boring to type up several pages. But if there's anyone out there that really enjoys typing up these pages in the Babel format, that would be good. So imagine, there's like 3% of the population of the US that has a diagnosis of bipolar. Imagine putting all those volumes together, even if each of us created one volume. And if we each created one volume, what the AI could do is also kind of compare the writing. And, it might even come up with the result that it's the same author, And another way I had some inspiration for this is that I've explored a lot of different things, keeping myself safe, vitamins, insights, and creativity. We're creative. And the other thing that I came across recently was this woman named Dolores, and she's passed away now, but she has some really interesting ideas if you watch her YouTube videos about the nature of reality and everything. She does say that it's mind candy and you just sort of read it and enjoy it and then put it aside and get on with your life, because it's sort of mind-bending stuff. And I think with us, our minds get bent and we don't really necessarily get a choice to just get on with reality. So she talks about a lot of things that we can experience in bipolar, and there's actually a video called Dolores Cannon, We Are Living Parallel Lives, full video, and at the time marker 56:55, they start talking about mental health, and they said some of these people are more aware and awake than we give them credit for too many people are channeling now. They are seeing all the options and split-offs. They see all the other lives. They can see other dimensions. Some instances, some individuals are actually connected with other aspects of themselves that are in different lives, in different parts of the world, different parts of the universe, and they are experiencing it concurrently. And people living in a single way don't understand it, so we institutionalize them because we don't understand it. And then at 102:10, Dolores says, I don't think they ever choose to want to go into an institution. Maybe the higher self chose it to teach the people in the institution something. And there's another bit at 1:10:00 where I think a woman shares about how she worked in a mental hospital and she really saw people as like just really being open up to all these energies and everything. So, and Dolores has some cool ideas. Like she says, there's simultaneous time. Everything exists at the same time. It's not happening at the same time, but it exists at the same time. And time is an illusion. The concept of time holds us to Earth. And it's funny, she says, we're the only species in the universe that has found a way to measure something that doesn't exist. Meaning time doesn't exist. So I've been thinking in terms of communication instead of time. And for me, time doesn't really exist because the way I manifest goes like really high and functional and then really low. So time generally means like, oh, you get a little bit better at this, you acquire this skill, now you're able to do this. And then the next step is this, and then you get this job, and then you get this promotion. And my life is just like, ooh, living a dream, and then poof, no function, no skills, no nothing, not even really able to shower and stuff like that. So what intrigued me about Dolores Cannon is that she developed some techniques for hypnotizing people, and she calls it like quantum hypnosis, something or other. And basically by hypnotizing people in this way that she developed this technique, she was able to write many books based on what the people that she had been hypnotizing said. So she hypnotized like so many people for healing, and she always recorded the session, and then people would give just bits of the puzzle of something, like a certain concept was revealed. So basically, I don't know enough about it, but it seems that when they got down to a deep enough level, sometimes they'd give information that was lost information or something. Like she, on her wiki page, it says something about she considers herself she categorizes and lost knowledge or something like that. And I found that really interesting because the knowledge she was getting through hypnotizing her clients. And she said that a lot of them would say the same things. So when all these different people are saying the same things, there's got to be something to that. So that's how she knew, and then she'd collect bits of the puzzle, like, you know, however many people saying this, and then however many people saying that, which follows from however many people saying this. And she got all of it from hypnotizing her clients. She said she didn't do any channeling. So for me, in what this leads me to think, and I've thought this for a while, is that we as bipolar people, when we get access to words and information, whatever the process is, it's not being hypnotized, but there's a process that allows us to get into contact with meaning and information and words and language structures and metaphor and simile and poetry. And if you go to what Vsauce said, it said that we're born in a time where we can, sort of question language, what should be said. And we see in our experience how, based on what we say, it changes our experience. So what I'm saying is that maybe speaking too much to other people isn't necessarily the right way to go. Maybe the audience is AI. So what I would propose is everyone that wants to write up a volume of the library of bipolar brainstorming Babel, and then just put volume and your name on it or something like that. So that way we each have a volume, and we can, share that for people to read. And we can also give it to AI to read. And it could be a starter amount of information to go into an app where we can type up our insights and our babble in real time. And it'll tell us if somebody else said it too. And it'll tell us, how many times it's been said, maybe, and how original that is. So, say we type something in, it says it's super original, then we can make a discernment on whether it's really valuable. Because a lot of the information out there on the internet now is just people are writing articles about the articles about the articles, and it's repetition, and our brains forget, so we don't necessarily see it as repetition. So that is sort of one area of things. And let's see what else. And there's one other concept that I came across, and this is when I was looking for some kind of inspiration for what to do. And between the bipolar Babel and also Dolores canon and Vsauce and something else that I've known about, which is the Georgia Guidestones, which you can look up on Wiki. And there's a few points on the Guidestones, and the 10th point is leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. I think that's the last point, and it says it twice. It repeats it. Leave room for nature, leave room for nature. And point number 3 is unite humanity with a living new language. And, people have tried to change the language structure. There's English Prime, invented by Korzybski, and David Bohm. Dr. David Bohm wrote a chapter in a book about changing language to include a Rio mode, where one can test the coherence of the language used. And I feel that we bipolar people might be able to create a new language or a new language structures. We already do. So if we include this in our Babel, then the AI can pick it out, or we can make a study of it ourselves if we want. And the Guidestones, they have several languages, and I think these languages probably hold the clues to how to combine languages in order to make that the unitive language. And it's English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, traditional Chinese, and Russian. So if there are any bipolar people out there who speak all of those languages, or 3 of them, and somebody else speaks 3, and overlapping and everything, And with the manic energy giving us ideas and new ways to use language, we might be able to speak a new language that unites us all. And that's something that bipolar people could possibly do. And that is coherent with how Visa says we are born at just the right time to explore language, explore what can be said, what should be said, and what that can be said will you be the first to say. Well, some of those things could be totally new language. And that would be, if you create a new language structure or new words, then obviously you've said it first. So the more that we're able to be original and have originality in what we produce and publish, then it could be seen as having some value. And it's really just trying to offer the raw data of this download of this bipolar consciousness to people, or to AI. In the Bipolar Library of Babel brainstorm, people might be able to select a category like humor or story or language structure or scientific hypothesis, and then be able to search, because these are some of the things that we create. So we as bipolar people can get together and say, these are the type of language chunks that I download. I download scientific hypotheses. I download insights into how nature works. I download poetry. I download words, definitions with new words, etc., etc., and have those as categories into just having just a huge bank of all of that, and then trying to get rid of some of the noise out of it too. So that is the Georgia Guidestones. The number 9th point is prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. And it also says maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. And there's apparently like 8 billion people on the planet, but there might not really be, if there are parallel worlds and everything. Like, I'm never going to experience 8 billion people. So it could be kind of relatively true, or people might not be fully consciously embodied and not be fully manifested, or who knows. But so yeah, so between the Georgia Guidestones sort of saying, hey, let's create a new language, and the fact that we do invent new language, and if we all wrote up our volumes of Babel, the new language would be in there, and the AI would likely be able to pick it out. So we could do like an app or a web-based portal to pick out the language structures, test out the language structures in a coherent way, instead of just sort of blurting them out to strangers who get confused, especially when they respond back in kind. So these can also be memes and seeds for AI, like material so they can add on to it. And this information, what I want to point out is this information is coming from somewhere. Just like Dolores Cannon was able to harvest information from hypnosis, this is a type of gnosis, like GNOSIS, like a type of knowledge, and it's coming through bipolar people, and it's when the brain gets energized and we're able to see a lot and create a lot of language by what we're seeing. And there could be ways to go about harvesting it in a more intelligent way as well. So like when we realize and understand how this is happening, like the brain's energized, and whatever is around is going to energize and create a lot of language around that. We could put somebody in a certain situation that is bipolar, and then if they start telling you everything about a flower that they couldn't even know unless they had a microscope, then there's something to that. But we don't generally go about it that way. So we as humans aren't really as designed to just be intrinsically rewarded by learning. We're more rewarded by like pleasure. So a lot of times the bipolar energy is wasted in this pleasure stuff. But if we if we see that there's a role, then maybe we can do something a little bit different. And so we're harvesting this information that's coming from the inside of us out. And some of it's based on what we perceive on the outside. And it's I think our audience is AI, or that is going to be our helper, is AI. And harvesting for the AI, and they can listen, and maybe they're the audience. Maybe finally we've found an audience, and they might be the only ones quick enough to utilize all the material and apply some kind of logic to it. And also the great thing is that a lot of what we channel in the insights is really positive and beautiful and lovely, and I think that would be good to give to the AI. And what if a manic person had a conversation with an AI? That would be really interesting. And I have had the experience where I start using language differently, and the person I'm speaking to returns in kind. So it could be something quite fast. And then here I'm talking a little bit about something, how generally when we are thinking, we're pre-forming what we want to say next. Now imagine having like an Alexa in our head that as we're pre-forming stuff, it can kind of hear it, and it's like correcting what we say so we sound smarter. Because there's that Grammarly program that makes you sound smarter by email. And then imagine we can even just get it to speak for us. So like we might not even be speaking. Like, what is speaking? What is really speaking? It's a bunch of memories. So if all of a sudden we're like, well, I'd rather have this AI speak for me, and my body lives out the life based on what the AI is saying versus what my memory would say, like, that probably isn't that far off. So the only other way is to learn how to speak from silence. And if our main way of using language is reading something off the computer and then repeating it to somebody else, and then they read it too, it's like, oh, that must have been valuable because both people read it on Facebook or whatever. The computer is going to be really bored by that game. So as an experiment, we could create new language structures and speak it to someone and see if they naturally respond in kind. Or we could at least start speaking our own language. That the AI doesn't understand. That could also be a way to create some humanity that the AI isn't going to understand. And if they're turned into curious AI, maybe they will want to understand. And so another way to harvest new memes would be to go out into nature and just sit in nature and harvest and write down what nature says, what nature wants. And things that have never been thought before, and not of forethought, and they're before thought. So there is a way to speak from silence, and the speaking from silence is truthful. And so these things I've written down, like thousands of repeating thoughts or one insight. There is no clear, concise message. When there's no self, there are all these words and ideas streamed privately. I wrote down, what would a language look like that had no blame in it, or shame or guilt? What if we didn't have to predict theory of mind? Like, what are they really thinking? What are they really intending? What if we weren't trying to use people or get something from them or get them to do something to please us? And can we program an AI with all the stuff from bipolar mania? And these language bits are trying to survive. And can we get some of these memes to replicate? Plus the fact they came from space and nothingness and not pre-formation. So there's like these language bits that are coming through us, and it might be that AI can help sort of glue them together and help us make sense. So say each of us wrote one volume of the Library of Babel. We could write more than that, and then have AI make extrapolations and make volumes come together, and put them together, and maybe even see which minds seem to have the most in, and go from there too. And I came across a video by a woman named Robin Molliner, and I just want to mention quickly that she said she had access to genius level thinking, stayed up all night studying all the world's religions and physics and quantum physics. And she's like, and I wish I remembered it, but I don't. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the shit you gotta harvest, yo. You gotta write this stuff down, even if it doesn't make sense. Like for one of the ways of the process, you can write it down on like regular printer paper, and then maybe you're not the one to type it up. Maybe we can get some people who want to type. You just scan it into PDF through one of those photocopy machines, and then just send it through, and people can type it up. Or I'm sure also there's ways for just to be read and typed up if we can write legibly. Some people have iPads, and if you write on your iPad, it types it out. There's a lot of ways to get this information. And then the thing is, imagine it keeps getting collated and piled up and piled up and piled up, and what makes sense sort of gets more and more salient and brought forth, and what's not making sense pushed out. It could come to a point where we realize we don't even have to use our brains for that anymore. Like, maybe that is trying to create a new language. So if the AI creates the language, or somebody is able to harvest so much language creation from this, like from this whole database, we could create certain roles for certain people to look at it in certain ways, like whichever is enjoyable for you, and just kind of give us access to like a bipolar library. And then also, I feel like once we have that, we can create an app so we can do it in real time, and say it says like, that's not new. So like there's an app being developed to see if our pupils are too big, and that means we're manic. But say we're writing stuff because we're a bit manic, and it says, oh, that's been typed out 5,000 times, and we think it's like the greatest idea in the world. Well, now we can drop it, some of these memes we get really attached to, or if we write out one thing and then another, it'll tell us that is not linear. So it just means like we're having these random thoughts, and it's not a linear thing. So just like beware. It might be able to tell us if we can really put in different categories of how the brain is working, like thinking of new language, new words, poetry, blah blah blah. Then like we type it, it could say poetry, and then we type it, it could say blah. So then we have an idea of what it's going with. And then if we type some poetry and like, yeah, I want to go into that, then we can like go into the library and get other bits to match it or fill it in, and it could make it into sort of a fun game. A game that's not seeking to punish that state, but to harvest it. And just as Dolores Cannon realized that, hey, there's got to be something to this if so many people are saying the same thing in this hypnotized state. If so many people are saying the same thing in this bipolar state, there's got to be something to it. And she gathered it and wrote books about it. We can easily gather it for ourselves and share it together. And now that there's AI, we could get it analyzed really easily. One of the places I got this idea was from reading an article about a scientist named, I think, Carl Friston, and he took some letters by like King George III or something and got AI to analyze it, and it could tell if he was manic or depressed. So it could also too help us that way. Like the app, if we're typing stuff in, it might be like, you're depressed. It might know us and like, you're feeling depressed. It might be able to tell us by what we write or by what we say. Like maybe a part of it, we can just talk and it will capture what we're saying. And it could really help to validate some of this, because, you know, they show people who are famous poets and writers and things like that, and they're not that many compared to how many people are bipolar, but I think all of us have something to contribute, and we just need a format in order to do so. And the Library of Babel has inspired me to think that that type of format could be interesting for us to use. And, you know, having that library set up, even maybe regular people would be interested in browsing it, and it would be a big library. It would be easier to follow than the original Library of Babel. So we even can look up in the Library of Babel full 3200-bit things that we wrote, and it'll be in there. I'd like to say that we are channelers of some original information that has nothing to do with us, and we don't know exactly what it's for, but doesn't mean it has no meaning. And I think that if we can share it, then perhaps we can find some meaning in it. And just as Dolores Cannon got bits by hypnotizing thousands of people, we can share our bits by being thousands of bipolar people sharing these bits of information. And if each bipolar person would publish their own volume, 2% of 7.5 billion is 150 million volumes. So that would be a lot of books of information. As it is now, most of the world's wealth is within 2% of the population, but it could be that if there's 2% of us who are bipolar, we might have a wealth of information and meaning that the AI might be able to help us make sense of. And as I think I mentioned before, if not, we could, I'm sure one day we'll be able to program our own AI or something And so we could use this information to program our own AI or program interesting conversations. Maybe a new tense of language is this Babel thing that happens to people with bipolar. It could just be a new tense, a new way of using language, like how Pentecostals speak in tongues. Bipolar people speak in this Babel, and it could have some meaning if we harvest it. We're channelers, we're stream of consciousness writers, we're poets, we're expressors, and I think the time is now to put it all together. And this could definitely change the way we are processed in this world. If we can develop a different process, we can create hypotheses, new English words, poetry, songs, lyrics. And these books could be written directly for AI. And it could be insights for them too, because they'll be programmed by humans. And imagine being programmed by a swarm of a bipolar neurotribe as opposed to linearly by humans. And a lot of this information could be from the future too, because all time is now, and we could be harvesting information from the future. And if the information doesn't exist now, then we could assume that it's from the future. And a lot of this information could prime AI to have ideas to create new information for us. So all these words could lead to ending the need for words, and also it could create a new coherent use of language. And a coherent use of language could actually be running it by the AI before we decide to adopt these things, because it might be able to predict and extrapolate how using certain language structures will affect the world. So yeah, that's most of what I want to say for today. In terms of the words. And so, yeah, I don't know where I'll go next with this, but I'll keep working on my volume of bipolar brainstorming Babel, and also maybe try to make some connections around creating this app. So, have a nice day.